this episode of our Facebook broadcast. My name is Cindy Speaker, and I have with me today Nathan Guin of Gardberg Kemmerly. He is a VA attorney, and he's going to talk with us about a topic that I have never heard of, and that is Nexus medical opinions and why they're important to the VA disability process. So Nathan, thanks for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me again, Cindy. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, we've done this a few times now. We're getting pretty used to it. It's getting more comfortable all the time.
I would say I think this is the first time we've had like no connection hiccups or anything like that. So it's definitely going a little bit more smoothly.
Right. We usually have some little glitch someplace. Yeah. Well, Nathan, what is a Nexus medical opinion and what is the significance of it?
So at its base, a Nexus medical opinion is essentially just establishing a relationship between something that happened in service and a current disability. So essentially, like let's say a veteran fell or hurt his knee somehow or another in service and still suffers from, say degenerative joint disease of the knee, something with his knee, or had a total knee replacement, things like that. Part of getting service connection would be getting a Nexus medical opinion. And essentially what that's going to say is that the current diagnosis, whether that be arthritis, total knee replacement, whatever it might be, is related and is likely as not caused by the injury in service. So essentially, it's just providing a causal link between an injury that occurred, and a lot of times it'll be, the denials will be, well, this was acute in service, so you have to have that link to bring it together. And the reason why it's so important is because it's one of the essential components of a successful claim for service connection. So you have to have an injury, event, or disease in service, a currently diagnosed disability, and a Nexus medical opinion or a medical link. So, at its base, it sounds fairly simple, but it is one of the most important things you have to have in the case.
How strong does that causal link have to be? Does it have to be 100%, 50%? How strong of a link does there need to be established there?
So the standard is as likely as not, which basically means over 50%. So if that's 50.0001, as long as it is a hair over 50%, and a doctor will state that, and the magic words are as likely as not. But in terms of percentages, it's just the tiniest portion, the tiniest nudge over 50%, and that's really what the standard is. It doesn't have to be 100%. It doesn't need, it just has to be as likely as not that that's what caused it.
You mentioned the magic words. Is there a fairly specific format that this opinion needs to be expressed in?
Well, the more rationale and the more thorough the opinion is, the better. But at the very end, when you're concluding, the magic word is definitely something like, or the magic sentence phrase would be, and I'll use the knee example again. Veterans currently diagnosed with degenerative joint disease of the bilateral knees or the left knee, the right knee, whatever it may be, is as likely as not due to X event that occurred in service. So a lot of times it'll say, that, as likely as not related to the fall that veteran sustained on, July 4th, 1968, and therefore, it's causally related. Okay.
Now, I assume it's a doctor that expresses this opinion. Would it be a family doctor, or what type of doctor would do this?
So it doesn't even have to be a doctor necessarily. It can be anybody. And there's a code section, which I won't bore everybody with, that says that competent medical evidence can come from basically anybody who is competent to render medical opinion. So we can get an opinion from a physician's assistant, nurse practitioner, in some cases registered nurses. So it doesn't have to be a doctor. It can be any medical professional. It can be, but rarely is VA doctors. They can make the opinions, but they rarely do. It can be a family doctor, and there are a number of medical professionals that provide VA opinions. As likely as not, Nexus opinions for veterans. You kind of have to search around for those. We have a couple that we use, but it really can be any medical professional. It does not have to be a doctor, and specifically, it doesn't have to be a VA doctor.
Okay. I'm just curious because, Nathan, we talked before about another very specific topic to VA claims, and that was the compensation and pension exams. Does this in any way relate to that? And maybe it doesn't.
It does, because the C&Ps, the compensation and pension exams, can act as a Nexus statement. And sometimes they do. more so, a lot of times we see it more in like PTSD cases, and they'll relate it to service. But frequently, it is to kind of combat those negative opinions. A lot of times, the CNP examiners will find that there is no link, that it's not as likely, not at least as likely as not, there's not a causal link. And so you have to combat that. And that, going along with the kind of 50% thing, the nudge over 50%, if there's a balance of the evidence, then they have to give the benefit to the claimant. So if you can give them as strong of a statement, from your doctor saying it is related, and it goes up against the CNP that's negative, they're supposed to give the claimant the benefit of the doubt and bump them up, and obviously grant the benefit sought.
Okay, interesting. Wow. Now, this is just so complex. I mean, a veteran, so they have this disability. They believe, and I'm sure that they are correct, that there is a causal connection, but now they have to work through all this paperwork. How do you? Right. I mean, it sounds like you almost need a lawyer to work through it. Do some veterans? Helpful. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think you weren't telling me the question.
No, I was just going to say, is this something that a veteran can do on their own? How would they even know that all of this exists?
They can, and I guess the easiest way to say it is, a lot of times they'll spell it out. They'll say there's no link, and so they don't implicitly or explicitly tell you in a denial that you need a Nexus medical opinion. A lot of times it'll be we found no link, or the CNP examiner found no link, and so they can, in theory, a veteran could do it on their own. But you run into issues like if they only go to the VA, and VA doctors are not usually chomping at the bit to give positive Nexus medical opinions. Yeah. Or you have, some family doctors who are great family doctors or specialists or whoever they may be, that are really good doctors, good people, and that has nothing to do with that. But they're kind of reluctant. A lot of doctors are reluctant to put that out there and say, I'm sure, even if it's as, at least as likely as not. It's not even like they're saying they're sure. A lot of them are reluctant to put that on paper, which I can understand, that they may not want to do that. So they can do it on their own, but there are certainly limitations and environmental factors, I guess, for lack of a better term, that can make it more difficult or even impossible for them to do it on their own.
So in getting an attorney involved like you, and I know you handle a lot of these cases, does it cost the veteran? How do they pay for your services?
So just generally speaking, if a veteran wants to hire us, we're free unless we win, basically, is the easiest way to put it. So there are obviously sometimes costs associated, like with ordering medical records, or if we did need to get a Nexus medical opinion, and those, if we are successful, are recouped at the end. So there's usually not an upfront cost in terms of hiring us, or if we need to get a Nexus medical opinion. And like I think I kind of alluded to earlier, we have a couple of different medical professionals in different fields that we use pretty frequently to try to help bolster our cases and get veterans the benefits that they're entitled to. So I guess we have connections, you could say.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And it sounds like a lot of this, that you're able to really facilitate and streamline a very complicated process on behalf of the veteran. Yeah. Was that a fair statement?
Yeah. I think so. It's something that we deal with, pretty frequently. And I've had a couple of different cases just recently. I've had probably about half a dozen in the past this year alone, where I've looked at the case and say, man, there's some good stuff here, and you can kind of connect the dots if you really want to, but they really need you to be explicit. And we've had successful outcomes in those cases because we had said, we need to bite the bullet here, get this Nexus medical opinion. And we've come out with beneficial and positive decisions for the veteran.
Yeah. Well, let me go back to the compensation and pension exams, because we mentioned that. So you made a comment that sometimes the CNP exam is sufficient and you don't have to have the Nexus medical opinion. Can you give me an idea, percentage? How often do you need these Nexus medical opinions?
The majority of the time, the vast majority. The CNP exams, by their very nature, are supposed to be VA medical opinions, and so they're essentially the VA asking their own doctors to give them an opinion and say, is it as likely as not, or is it not? And so they usually act as a negative Nexus.
There's kind of
But
an inherent
sometimes
conflict of interest there.
it seems to be. Yeah, you could say that for sure. But
Yeah.
sometimes, sometimes it comes out right, but in those very few instances, it seems like
Okay.
the evidence is so overwhelming
Yeah.
that something's related to service, whatever condition it may be. And like I said, a lot of the times it's PTSD because they can confirm stressors and things
Yeah.
like that are a little bit more difficult to prove than, or a little bit easier through like service records than you could for a physical injury itself.
Yeah.
So, which maybe is kind of counterintuitive, but that's usually the ones where we see positives. And even then, it's very rare. So a lot of times the CMPs are not that helpful for the veteran themselves.
Okay. Okay. What's the cost? Is there a cost associated? You said something about a cost for the Nexus medical opinion. What kind of cost is that?
So it depends on where you get it. Obviously, if you can get one from the VA, then you're good to go. And I don't know if there's, I'm not through the VA health system, but you pay whatever your copay was, or if there's any cost associated with that at all, then that's what it would be. The same for if you see a specialist or a private doctor. Sometimes they'll charge a fee. Sometimes it'll just be, the cost of copay for that visit. It really kind of depends, but usually it's going to be somewhere in the range of, at the very low end, probably like $250, and at the more median level, around $500 to $750 for an opinion on that, because that's usually for, they have to review the claims file from the veteran, which it sometimes can be, 2,500 pages or more. And so that's obviously time consuming to go through so many documents. And then they would also have to go through any current documents that they have, from other doctors to try to make that link. So a lot of it's document review, and obviously, people's time, especially medical professionals' times, are very valuable. And so there's sometimes a substantial cost that comes with it. It really just depends on how far you have to go to get a Nexus opinion, and if you can get it from your normal doctor or not.
And at what point do you get these opinions? So the veteran files his claim for disability and begins the process. I think they have to have the CMP exam. So what are the steps? Walk us through the steps of a VA disability claim, if you would. They file the claim, and you can. By the way, can you help with that? Or do they have to do that on their own?
The regulations bar anybody else from filing the claim. A lot of times people don't know where to get the forms, and there'll be a potential, and they say, "Well, I want help with my VA claim," and say we can't get involved unless there's a decision. But here is, you can find it on the internet. But a lot of times people either don't have a computer or they don't have access to it, and we can give them the forms they need to fill out and say, "Come back when you have a decision." But we can't, fill out the forms and do evidence submission, things like that. There has to be a rating decision before we can get involved.
Okay, so let me just stop you there for a second. So if they file first, then do you only get involved if they get denied?
Not necessarily.
No.
So the VA is different. It's similar and also very different from Social Security in many aspects. The most significant of which is it's incremental. So a lot of times people get denied, but we also take cases where someone gets service connected, but it's for a certain, 10%, 20%, 30%, whatever it may be. And they say, well, that's not enough, or the effective date they believe is incorrect. And so there are different things you can appeal. Obviously, you can appeal for higher ratings, earlier effective dates. So it's not just denials. It's people who are, it's veterans who are unsatisfied with their current ratings and want increases and feel like their condition warrants it. And we help with those as well.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. And when can they be submitted as evidence? So at what point in the claim were they actually submitted as evidence?
So the beauty of the VA is that there's no deadline necessarily for when evidence can be submitted. So you can submit it with your initial claim. You can submit it with a notice of disagreement. You can submit it while you're waiting to get a rating decision or while you're waiting to get a statement of the case. You can submit it at any time. The only time that you can't, a lot of times if you go to the Board of Veterans Appeals and you have a hearing and the case isn't remanded for further development, at that point, evidence submission is kind of cut off unless you ask them to keep the record open for a number of days to get an opinion if you don't already have one. But really, at any point in the process, you can submit a Nexus medical opinion, and it is to be considered, reviewed, as evidence for your claim. And so most of the time we'll submit those with pleadings. So if we have a notice of disagreement or a Form 9, which is an appeal to the Board of Veterans Appeals, a lot of times we'll submit it within those because we can make additional arguments and kind of bring in more of the evidence that we have to link everything together.
Right.
But they can be submitted at any time.
Okay. Nathan, next time when I was going to go into, I would love to ask you to really recap and go through the steps of a VA disability claim, but I have a feeling that's a lengthy discussion, isn't it?
It can be. It can
Okay.
be as easy or as difficult as you'd like it to be.
Well, can you just kind of give us, maybe we can go in depth another time, because here's what I'm thinking. Okay, I know some veterans. I have a friend that's a veteran, and you did a training we did an interview, but to me, it was a training on some of these issues for veterans who are disabled. They're having health problems and they're not getting any help, and they don't even realize they're eligible or what to do. And sometimes it's related to the less than honorable discharge, we've talked about that in another session too. But in going through this, can you give us kind of maybe just the bullet point steps? Mm-hmm. So they apply for disability. You can maybe help them find the paperwork. They do that themselves. And then suppose they get their rating or whatever, you could potentially step in and help them in what areas. And I'm starting out with the things that we expressed already, but you talked about you could potentially help them with that rating, maybe get it higher, but take it from there and tell us a little bit more about how an attorney can be helpful in this process.
Yeah, so bare bones, you have the application, like you said, the rating decision, and you can appeal for an increased rating, or you can appeal for service connection if you're denied. At any point after the rating decision is issued, an attorney can get involved. So if you get your rating decision back and you still want to go at it yourself and file a notice of disagreement, you can do that, obviously. But basically, at any point in the process, we can be engaged in a case and be hired to help any veteran with their cases. So when you get a rating decision, you have to file a notice of disagreement within 1 year of receiving that decision. And there's a form that is associated with that. I'm not sure what number it is off the top of my head, but you submit that. The next thing you'll get is what's called a statement of the case. And that's essentially a rating decision. It's just formatted differently, and it's the next step. So you have to differentiate, between the two somehow so you know where you are. At that point, you have 60 days to file what's called a Form 9. So that's easy because it's Form 9. You can find that. And then you can also submit any additional evidence you want to with that. That will take you to the Board of Veterans Appeals, where you can either have a hearing or you can opt not to have a hearing with a veterans law judge. So you can have them. Those are all conducted at the regional offices. In whatever state you're in. There's a few that have multiples, but generally speaking, they're at the state capitol, like in Alabama, it's in Montgomery, Mississippi, Jackson, so on and so forth. And they'll issue a decision, and they can either grant, deny, or remand your claim. So let's say they grant it, you can say, I'm happy, we're good to go, everything's done. If they deny it, you can either file a motion for reconsideration, or you can have 120 days to appeal it to the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. If they remand it, then it kind of turns it around, sends it back to the regional office for further development, whatever that might be. And then the regional office will issue what's called a supplemental statement of the case. Sometimes those are done before the board hearings. Like sometimes you'll get a statement of the case, you'll appeal it, and then you get a supplemental statement of the case, and then you get a hearing. It just kind of depends on how it goes. And so from there, it goes back up to the board, and then the whole system goes forward with that, whether you're granted or denied, and you can take that to the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. So that's kind of the easiest way to explain it. It's still a little bit.
That is fantastic information. And I hope, for those of you watching, whether you're watching live or watching via the replay, if you have friends, family members, loved ones who are veterans, and they have some kind of a disability or medical situation, they're not collecting benefits, but you think potentially they would be eligible, I hope that you'll share this with them, because I think, Nathan, you just did a beautiful job of laying that out. Like I said, this is a very complicated process. And I think that, the fact that you know all the steps and are able to guide a veteran through it. Let me ask you this. If a veteran wants to get in touch with you, how can they do that? Okay,
so they can give us a call here at our office in Mobile. It's 343-1111 is our phone number. They can also find us on the web at gardberglaw.com. That's GARDBERGLAW.com. And if they want to, they can also reach out to us via email, and that would be vacontact@gardberglaw.com. Again, GARDBERGLAW.com. So those are a couple of different ways they can get in touch with us, and we can answer any questions they may have.
Excellent, excellent. And let me say one more thing to those of you watching. If you have questions or you have topics that you would like Nathan to cover, I mean, he obviously has a vast knowledge of this area of law. If there's topics you want to hear covered, please suggest them, put it right in the comments section, and we'll schedule another time and ask Nathan if he'll be willing to come back and cover cover other topics of interest. So would you do that, Nathan?
Yeah, absolutely. Requests are always welcome. Sometimes it's hard to think of a new idea because I deal with a lot of this stuff every day. So I don't necessarily think of the topics that might be pressing for veterans. So any input from viewers, requests are welcome, and we'll cover anything you want us to cover.
Excellent. Nathan, thanks so much for being with us today.
No problem, Cindy. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay. And to our viewers out there, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We'll talk to you again soon.